and as a member of the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and the Senate Committee on International Relationship and Trade. Please help me welcome Kel Seliger.
Craig, thank you very much. Every community that has somebody like you to work on this sort of thing is important, and it constitutes a very large national voice that the country needs. There is not a prettier morning anywhere in America today. There is also not a more important or significant gathering anywhere in America today or this holiday than this one. Because it's about the Constitution by which we live that makes our citizenship unique among all the countries in the nation. This gathering today is about the young men and women who are thousands of miles away, willing to serve and sacrifice for us and a Constitution. And we look and people talk about the Tea Party in 2010. Tea Party didn't really start just now. The sentiment that drives the Tea Party didn't start just now. I think it probably really started with Thomas Jefferson, when he said that every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers alone. The people alone are its only safe depositories. And somewhere along the road, that sentiment kind of got obscured, and to a great extent, I think, until Ronald Reagan came along. And he said, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. And when we look at things like a national debt that's now $13 trillion, and look at the fact that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to pay the kind of proportion of their income to the government that people in places like Sweden pay, we run the risk of their not having the opportunities that our parents had, even with something like the Great Depression. And that's not the America people really envision. The Tea Party movement is having, I think, a measurable effect in a lot of areas. I think the Lisa Murkowski race in Alaska is particularly significant. Marco Rubio in Florida, the Utah election of Mr. Bennett, and even among Democrats, when Joe Sestak won in Pennsylvania because he said government had gone too far. It had been too far reaching and too insensitive and spending too much money. There's a sign over there that says, what does it say? We can't afford Congress, or Congress has spent all of our money. It's true. The national budget is something that ought to be a concern to everybody. It's growing by $1.5 trillion a year, and quite frankly, we cannot afford it. Craig read some of the things about me being in the Senate, and my chairmanship of the redistricting committee is significant because it means the first bill that probably comes before that committee will be mine. It is my intention that that bill will show that Howard County stays in Senate District 31. It is a tremendous honor and one for which I'm very grateful to represent you in the Texas Senate. And you send a very important message to the Texas Senate that people can govern themselves, that the job of government is to serve, and it's the job of people to govern. And you'll see some things then, I think, come out of this legislature, or go into the legislature at least, of which you will approve. Currently, we have structurally a projected $18 billion deficit in the state of Texas. And here's how we're going to address it. With some things like the rainy day fund, and we're going to see increased sales taxes and things like that. But the first thing that we're doing is cutting all state agencies 5%. Yeah, with the exception of your public schools and health care like Medicare and Medicaid match. The first agency, in my knowledge, to go in and make those cuts were us in the legislature. If we are going to cut other people's budgets, and we don't educate children, and we don't directly provide health services, then we need to cut our budget first. And here's what's going to happen when we get to June of 2011. What always ought to happen is going to be a balanced budget, and there's going to be no deficit in the state of Texas, and that's what we're going to leave for the next 2 years. And I think that's particularly important. You're going to see very early on in this next legislative session a resolution passed on the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment is maybe the simplest of them. It simply says that those powers not specifically reserved for Congress belong to the states. All of them. For years and years and years, government has simply defaulted to the Commerce Clause and said, well, these belong to the federal government because some relation to the Commerce Clause. I don't think that's the way the Constitution was intended. It's not what the Constitution says specifically about those powers not specified to the federal government, and something needs to be done. One of the other resolutions that you're going to see has to do with the budget. And it simply says that the federal government, like this state government and so many others, is going to have a balanced budget. The growth is not to be larger than inflation and population growth, which are sort of immutable drivers of budgetary increases. And that means there will be fewer public programs and fewer entitlement programs because America cannot afford the ones it's got now going forward in the future. And hopefully we're going to see something that has to do with the 14th Amendment, which simply says that those people born in this country are American citizens. When that came along, and it was generations ago, the things that I hear and read, it was designed so that the children of slaves would have citizenship, which is perfectly reasonable. People who were brought here against their will, their children should be citizens. They lived here all their lives. I have no problem with that. The 14th Amendment was never designed to be either an incentive or a reward to violate American law. Yes. When someone crosses the border, and people are welcome to cross our border and do by the thousands every day, but when they do it in other than the legally prescribed fashion, generally the same as every other industrialized country, they're simply breaking the law. You don't incentivize breaking the law in this country. If you do, you're not a nation of laws anymore. You're a nation, I guess, of suggestions. We can't afford to be that. Does anybody think that the goal of international terrorism is to come across the border and do harm to Americans at schools, at work? They've already done that once. Do we really want to provide an open door to people who would hurt and kill Americans? I think not. The Texas Senate already passed 2 years ago voter identification. It simply says that you must be who you say you are to vote. That most powerful and meaningful of all American rights, to vote. Passed the Senate. It's going to come up again, I feel certain, in the legislature. It's important. It's really important. Elections should be fair. Elections should reflect the will of the people. Nothing more, nothing less. It's interesting to me that a couple of weeks ago, if you were watching the news, and this is significant, Vice President Biden, a big favorite here, was talking on TV and keeps referring to the Tea Party as the Republican Tea Party. The Republican Tea Party. As I look around here and look at some of the folks who are very active in the Pachyderm Club here and things like that, it's not altogether untrue, but we must see an evolution as we go forward.